MusicalTalk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of MusicalTalk. I'm Thos Ribbits, a man who's been described as unchanging. And it's true, I was Thos Ribbits yesterday as well. Well, unbelievably, the Edinburgh Festival Fringe is very soon upon us again. Opening in August, it is the world's biggest arts festival, and a great deal of what goes on up in that fine city of Edinburgh is musical theatre. As usual, MusicalTalk will be covering as much as it can of the musical theatre slice of the festival, but in order to whet your appetite, this week we're going to be just finishing the business with last year's Festival Fringe. Because over the next 2 weeks, we're looking at the show that we identified as MusicalTalk's Pick of the Fringe 2016. A show called Royal Vauxhall by a man called Desmond O'Connor. Now, this was a show I adored, and it's one of the very few I went to see more than once. Next week, we'll be talking to 2 of the 3 performers in that show, Tom Giles and Sarah Louise Young, but this week we'll hear the conversation I had with the man behind the show, who, as I said, is called Desmond O'Connor. He wrote the book, but he also wrote the songs and the lyrics, a very talented man indeed. But what's it all about? Well, I'm actually going to let him explain that in the first few minutes of this conversation, because it's based on a true story, or at least an allegedly true story, of 3 very famous people meeting and doing something together which seems so unbelievable or unexpected. It is immediately fascinating and indeed intriguing. However, let me not ruin the story. Let Desmond himself tell you all about it. So, let's settle down, listen to the interview with the man behind last year's pick at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, Royal Vauxhall. MusicalTalk.
My name is Desmond O'Connor. I'm the writer, composer, lyricist of Royal Vauxhall, the musical about the night that Freddie Mercury and Kenny Everett took Princess Diana in disguise, in drag, to a gay pub in London.
Which is a fantastic premise for a show. So let's talk about the book first of all. I mean, forgive me, this is a sort of an urban myth, isn't it?
Well, I'm assured that it's a true story.
My source is close to the palace.
Yeah, I mean, I read the story in the paper a few years ago. No, so about a year and a half ago now. It was, of course, famously retold by Cleo Rockus in her autobiography,
Yes.
The Art of Positive Drinking. And
she's Kenny Everett's close friend.
Exactly, yeah, very dear friend of Kenny. And so that was kind of all over the press in London. I think I read it in the Standard or Metro, and was just intrigued by the story when I read it. So I'm kind of, at the time I remember thinking it's sort of such a preposterous story that it must be true, because you wouldn't make up something that was so ridiculous and so implausible, and the whole framing of it, they were sitting watching the Golden Girls and suddenly decided, let's go out. So I kind of knew the moment that I read the story that I had to do something with it, even if it was something frivolous and fun and just a kind of big gay musical, which I think was my thought at the time. And then inevitably, when you start to scratch the surface and start to think about the people involved and the moment in their lives, I started to realise there was a much bigger story to be told.
Slightly darker one as well.
Slightly darker, yeah. And I guess it's always interesting when something pricks your consciousness as a writer. It tends to happen in quite I think Bob Dylan does it. It tells a great story about sort of the inspiration sort of flying over him, or the genius flying over him, and that sort of tends to be the way that an idea arrives. And you're not always aware of why something has appealed to you. And it was only when I started to think about the telling of the story that I kind of realised, that the characters were so vitally important to me and was such a huge part of my life in the 80s, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
I rather hope we will.
And then there was a very important political aspect, because it just happened that sort of a short while after reading the story, I was guest hosting a club called Bar Whatever at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. Now that is one of the most brilliantly Catholic with a small c, all-inclusive. It's an LGBTQ XYZ night, but really the doors are open to absolutely anybody exactly who needs who needs
I am aware of the domain.
It's not that kind of club, but it's very much about having a totally safe, all-inclusive space for anyone who I think for one reason or another might be made to feel that they don't belong, to say, well, you do.
Yeah.
You belong here. And so it was a phenomenal honour to be asked by Ingo to come and guest host that club for a month. And while I was doing that, we suddenly started losing all these iconic venues in London. So we lost the Joiners Arms, we lost Madame Jojo's, we lost the Black Cap. We were about to lose the Royal Vauxhall Tavern.
I know, there was a big thing about that about a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. And that was sort of the genesis of this show, because I kind of realised I'm not part of the LGBT community, but I've always felt very closely aligned to it.
You're a close friend.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, through my work in cabaret and through all of my friends and colleagues. And I think that we had suddenly accidentally arrived at a time where we thought, well, suddenly gay rights are, top of the agenda, and we've got gay marriage, and, suddenly it's a very safe and accepting world in which to be gay.
It's a better world.
A better world, but not. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of the journey.
It's not the best world. Yes.
No,
if
definitely.
We're talking comparatives
and it's
superlatives. Yes.
Exactly, and I think that's something that was communicated to me brilliantly when I was still a teacher. When a gay colleague got married to his husband, and was fantastically proud and fantastically excited. And still, when one of the parents at the school asked him, noticed he was married and asked about his wife, and he didn't correct, and he said, he just felt so conflicted about that. And I think that that's still the true story for a lot of gay men and women in England, that yes, okay, your rights are equal technically to everybody else, but it's not an equal world.
No, I'm always being asked about my wife and children, who are invisible.
Live in Canada. So sorry, maybe sort of gone off piece there slightly, but the
No, but I think it's good contextual stuff, because it's absolutely true. And but even though we do live in a much better world, we forget actually how grim I was there in 1988, and it was a grim, in many ways, frightening place.
Yeah,
and even the top of society, at least in show business, well, in fact, literally, in terms of royalty, if you look at the world in that hierarchical way, were forced into enclosures, by which I mean social enclosures, I don't mean literal ones.
Yeah.
So yes, it was a dark and dangerous time, and we forget that.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of younger gay friends, and bless them, they know intellectually what it was like, but they don't know what it was like.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a boring old fart, but
I don't know. I don't think that does at all sound like that. And I think that venues, certainly at the time that the show is set, venues like the Royal Vauxhall Tavern were just of fundamental importance to the community, as you say, on every social strata. And it would be very easy to believe that, it's fine, we don't need places like that anymore. Well, I would say try telling that to the trans teenager who's been ostracised or beaten up or bullied or hassled and harangued by every single person that they know, and they need somewhere that they can go to feel safe. And that person, to my mind, is in exactly the same boat as the world-famous rock star who needs somewhere they can go to feel safe. As the high-paid television comedian who needs somewhere that they can go and be themselves. And indeed, yes, even the wife of the heir to the throne just needs somewhere she can be herself for a night. And that's really where Royal Vauxhall was born, of that need for a place that we can be ourselves.
So, but immediately, that you mentioned the word frivolous at the beginning, but absolutely everything you've said there is not frivolous in any way at all. However, what you do straddle so perfectly in the piece, if I may say, is that mixture of light frivolity and zaniness of three friends actually having a night in.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because you feel the connection between them. And the difficulty, and because it's a play like any other play or a musical, that as good drama, something happens and then things can get darker, and they do get darker, and also things are revealed inadvertently, sad, bad things. Not everyone comes out of it with an enhanced reputation, maybe the best way of putting it. But that's good drama. It's a well-written book, but it has its lightness, and it needs that lightness. And actually, I'm going to be honest, Kenny Everett of the three, of the triptych, is the one that I have the closest connection to.
Yeah.
Such an important part of my teenage life. And I've sort of carried him ever since, even though he's now starting to be forgotten in some circles, which is a sad thing.
It's a really sad thing. I guess there's a couple of things there that I would immediately pick up on that you said, in terms of the lightness and the frivolity of the script and the music. And the reason it had to be a musical and not a play is that, really lightness and frivolity and music and dancing are the things that we use to steer us through the darkness. Yes. And so therefore, as part of my creative palette, they're always there. And whether I'm writing musicals about the anti-terror laws, as I have, or the banking crisis, music's a really central part of delivering a much deeper, darker theme. But then also, Kenny Everett, and it's just heartbreaking that when I stand on the Royal Mile flying for the show, as I do, because I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty to promote a show. Or wet.
If the day requires it.
Yes, or wet and dirty, but we're going down a whole different line there.
My penny has just dropped, but thank you for offering it.
But Kenny Everett is the person who I need to describe to people and explain to people. And even in the show, the very first sort of draft that we did, I had, very well-respected colleagues coming up to me and saying, so who was this other guy? I don't really know who you're talking. I didn't listen to the radio back then. It's like, well, he was only the most influential DJ of the country of the era, and the most influential TV personality.
Modern radio goes back to Kenny.
I think, on really radio you wouldn't have Steve Wright. On TV you would never have had the young ones. You would never have had Friday Night Live. The whole wave of alternative British comedy was thanks to people like Kenny Everett. But I think really he was the person who spearheaded it.
Well, the video cassette in the 70s on ITV before even he got onto the BBC.
Yeah. But he destroyed his career and he destroyed himself because, as I have said on more than one occasion, in the 1980s every little boy in the country wanted to be Kenny Everett, apart from Kenny Everett.
Yes. It's that almost self-loathing thing going on, isn't it? Which was, we forget that's a big important, well, it was important, regrettable, but important, or an often regular part of being a gay man in that period. Because so many people who were out, even out people, didn't always want to be out. Most didn't, because society was so difficult and awkward.
And even the people that we celebrated on television, I'm thinking about the sort of John Inmans of the era, and the Kenneth Williams, Frankie Howard, all those people that, were very, very, what we would identify now as very obviously gay men, were not openly gay men. Well, because of course for the majority of their careers it was illegal. When Kenny Everett rose to fame, it was only just legal in this country.
It certainly wasn't accepted.
It was certainly not accepted. So, we love these people. It's kind of highlighted in one of the songs. We love these people to be flamboyant and camp and outrageous and over the top, but we don't like to think about what they do in their bed
life.
When they go home.
And so much of the show thematically is about imagery and protective imagery and the ability to trust someone enough to remove that. And then, of course, whether you can trust those people in the way that you think you can, which, of course, is explored.
Indeed.
Very nicely and subtly, actually. Because it's none of the actions, I'm not going to explain how it develops and what happens necessarily, but I don't want to ruin it for anyone who I hope is going to go and see it. Mm-hmm. But people are driven by different needs, panic, fear of exposure. I mean, that still exists today for different reasons. Sometimes the same reason, in fairness, but that makes people do terrible things, or it can make people do terrible things, and these things are explored. So I think, as I say, I go back to this wonderful balance of boom in your face, isn't this funny, zany, to use a Kenny phrase, zany comedy, and a real subtle investigation into what trapped people do, because they're all trapped in their own way, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to give away too much about the structure of the piece because I think it's important, but there is there's almost a kind of Wicklow purgatorial kind of setting to the whole thing that, whilst the show is set in Chelsea and then later in Vauxhall, it could just as easily be set in purgatory and or heaven stroke hell.
So, Mr. Dante, what do you... So can I ask you the obvious questions? As we're talking so much about the characters, because you wrote the book based on the characters, based on this story you'd heard. You were there in the 80s as I was. How well did you connect with the characters? Think you knew the characters? Did you have to research them, or do you have your own memories of them? I'm sure everything is informing everything else, but
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because they are characters who are so well known. Inevitably, there's
almost
kind
stereotypes of themselves.
Yeah, there's a very subtle balance that needs to be struck as a writer because everyone thinks they know everything about those three people, and we get so much that's reported by the press, so much that's reported formally through sort of writing biography, autobiography, so much that's reported through Wikipedia, which kind of feels trustworthy, but I have discovered is not.
Believe it or not, yes,
it's
a house of straw, if I may say.
So yeah, and because I had a story that I knew I wanted to tell about those three people, and because the story had to really be grounded on my knowledge of those people and kind of what they meant to me as well, even though there's a super objective in terms of the writing of the piece. It was really difficult. It was almost like a game of Kerplunk or Jenga, the kind of thing of having to make sure that the dates all fit and the events all fit.
It's intricate.
It's really intricate, and I think I minimised artistic licence, but I probably took a little bit of artistic licence here and there because the story that I wanted to tell really was about being yourself and giving yourself the chance to be yourself and accept yourself and offer yourself openly to the world, if that's possible. And what happens when you're laid bare, and the fact it's not always pretty and it doesn't always work, and sometimes you lose friends along the way, or sometimes you destroy friends along the way. So it's that that was my controlling objective for the piece. And then I tried to just be as true to the characters and their story as possible, and to honour their memory. And that was certainly Russell Lucas, who worked with me on the first sort of formal sort of preview production of the piece, and worked with me on the dramaturgy of the piece as well. You know, it was a really central thing that we honoured the memory of the three individuals, and I think we did that. So.
Oh yes, I think they are all sympathetic characters and empathetic characters, if that makes sense. You know, as an audience, I went in loving them, but I came out loving them. The play in no way diminishes that, and the performances, I think, really enhance that as well. We'll talk a bit about the performances in a minute, but I want to pay tribute to your craft. And it's very kind of you to pay tribute to your colleague, because it is right to remember that all art is collaborative, or all good art is collaborative. Ho ho. But let's just some of the subtleties of the piece. There's that beautiful concept of revelation and being true to yourself, and yet at the same time the way they are freeing themselves from their shackles being in the Chelsea flat is to go to a club in disguise. So you have this wonderful thing that they're all in disguise, and by being in disguise they somehow reveal who they are.
Yeah.
You know, and forgive me, that's just beautiful. That's nice, clever, subtle stuff. So it's all these little contrasts all the way through. In fact, subtle. You know, bless him. I love Kenny Everett, as I've said before. We will talk about the others, but I just want to... I need to praise Kenny. But no one would ever scream subtle about Kenny Everett. And yet the piece reveals the subtleties, but the subtleties you put in, and it's full of subtlety itself as well. I mean, you must tell me if I'm wrong here, but in the very opening, kind of, as a kind of a musical... It's not an overture by any means, but there's a kind of musical piece just at the beginning. And I hope I'm not reading too much into this, but is there just a hint of Electro People in that, which was his BBC One TV theme tune?
Oh, well, there's certainly, yeah. I mean, I've kind of tried to drop in little hints of, important Kenny moments, important musical moments of Queen, with some of which are done very subtly and some of which are done very blatantly. And it's always the risk, because I was talking to someone about this the other day, that as a composer, your aim is always to create music that is entirely, utterly original, whilst knowing that no one ever creates anything that's entirely, utterly original. But to write a piece like this was kind of, I don't know, almost just required me to have a sharp intake of breath and think, okay, I've got to do this, and I've got to deliberately write things that sound like other things, and hope that that's not seen as a shortcut, or hope that that's not seen as a
but
a cheeky
it is
thing to do.
a fully original score, but it contextualises the 80s. I mean, the 80s is also the other partner in the, it's almost like there's a quartet of people here. There's three people plus the 80s, which is the world they're living in. And you say some wonderful things. Your dialogue is so beautiful. The business about the 80s being the big party and the 90s being the hangover is. And I look back and I think, you're absolutely right about that. It was a time of excess, but it was through that excess also came pleasure. The 80s is remembered. I think there's a kind of dichotomy about remembering the 80s.
Yeah.
People haven't yet come to a one position on it, because it's also mixed up with politics as well. I mean, Margaret Thatcher appears in cameos.
Yes.
But whatever one thinks of Margaret Thatcher, she is the embodiment of the 80s in Britain. I mean, that is simply what she is.
Very much so. I suppose if it's the aim of a leader to be strong and to be remembered. I mean, it should also be the aim of a leader to be a good leader.
Yes,
but we know that's not true, you should be as iconic as you possibly can.
Did you choose that?
Don't think there's anyone who would debate the fact that, it's her and Churchill, really.
Yeah, and he couldn't carry off a pussy bow, could he? So
I'd like to have seen him in that particular scene with Margaret Thatcher as well. So, but yeah, the 80s, I mean, I guess it should come as no surprise. We look back on the 80s and we think of the neon clothes, and we think of Dallas, and we think of Dynasty, and we think of the fantastic electro music and how much fun we were having. But then if you pause and think, at what points in history do societies have lots of fun and create great music and go out and party? It's when things are really going up
the Roman Empire.
Yeah, exactly. It's when
the other popular term by disapproving people is decadence.
Right. Yeah, and I think there was a sense of that in the 80s, wasn't there? A sense of that kind of almost the end of days that was, I think, certainly a core running through the 1980s.
Well, without getting too controversial, I would like to say that I think the modern Daily Mail was born in the 80s, as in that kind of sort of moralistic.
Yeah, exactly. The
concept, but that seems to be, because they took over from the Express at that stage, just in popularity as well. So even that is we are all children of we're all Thatcher's children, actually.
Yes, fresh from the Thatcher snatch, as I think we say in the.
Do we?
Right, okay. in the show.
In the show.
Yeah,
sorry.
but
I don't use it at home.
Yes, so unashamedly in the 1980s, that was the era of the phrase, the return to Victorian values, wasn't it? Victorian family values. The era of oppression and male domination and the fetishizing of death and young boys having things strapped to themselves so they couldn't get an erection when they were sleeping. It's just kind of extraordinary, isn't it? It's the kind of thing that you would see happening at Torture Garden with its tongue firmly in its cheek or some other bit of its
whichever cheek we're talking about.
Exactly. But yeah, the sort of and also the kind of shadow of Clause 28 hanging over that era.
Absolutely.
So it was less than 20 years.
Tangible oppression, I think.
Yeah, less than 20 years previously, we had decided that it was unforgivably oppressive to criminalise people for their sexuality, and then just a hop and a skip into the future. We were saying that we should ban teachers and local councils from intentionally promoting homosexuality as though it was a choice, and as though it was a thing that was being forced upon people, and as though, let's not forget, AIDS was a punishment for something that was wrong, for a transgression that was being committed by a certain group in society.
It was having a moral value added to it.
Yeah,
yes, I agree.
Which is unbelievable now to kind of hear ourselves saying that, and unforgivable now to think back to the people who were pushing that through. And I've had this conversation recently about Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson supported Clause 28, and someone who worked with Boris and is a very convincing, compelling sort of orator on the topic of politics and modern politics said, well, every politician changes their mind from time to time, and I think Boris has more than made up for that. I'm interested to know what he could do to make up for that.
Quite.
How he could undo the damage that he did to an entire generation of young people trying desperately to make sense of themselves and their sexuality when all the odds were stacked against them, and to say we're going to further criminalise and demonise and stigmatise you.
Ghettoise as well.
I don't know exactly what the politicians who supported that bill can do, have done, to try and undo the evil and the wrongdoing that they did in that era. So again,
you make a good point.
Yeah. So that that's kind of it's a really important context for the piece when you talk about Kenny. We do say at several points, Kenny Everett, you're the most powerful man on TV. You could just come out as being gay. Of course he couldn't.
No. I remember Russell Harty when he was dying of hepatitis.
Mm-hmm.
The press laid into him because they thought he was going to die, and then he rallied, and they really didn't know what to do.
Mm.
And then he did some weeks later die. But by then, I think that the public, who've always been slightly more tolerant than the papers, had let the newspapers know that they weren't very happy with the coverage. And so when he died, they were much more glowing about it. And I always thought, and slightly later again in the 90s, when Michael Barrymore, who was grade A television at that time, somehow, when he did come out, the papers like these tabloids, the Red Tops, the Sun, really didn't know which way to turn.
No.
Because he was absolutely their kind of person. And then suddenly he wasn't their kind of person, but of course he still was, because I always think that the Barrymore is the coming out that changed things.
Yeah.
Because the press were back-footed. They simply didn't know how to deal with it.
But they were still waiting, weren't they?
Oh yeah,
they were waiting. They didn't know what to make of it, and they ended up. They kind of, as papers always do, because it's their job to kind of gauge public opinion and then tell the public what they think about a thing that they're already thinking,
and claim leadership.
But my God, those Red Top editors must have been so delighted on the day that Stuart Lubbock died at Barrymore's home.
Oh yeah, because they could get him.
Because it was a good old-fashioned gay horror story that allowed them to demonise someone that they were just dying to get their claws into. So they knew there'd be something at some point.
They bided their time.
Exactly, and the unfortunate death of a young man was yet another opportunity to turn the knife. Yeah.
So let us get back to the story, however. Let's talk, in fact, about the score, because you compose that too. I mean, you're a man of many talents.
I'm a man of very little free time, I think.
Well, I understand that, yes. But if you want something done, you ask a busy person, don't you?
This is true, yeah.
So you obviously have written songs before. This is not your first...
This is not my first musical, no. So I believe it was back in 2008 that myself and Andrew Taylor brought Failed States to the Fringe. It was a musical about... It was kind of inspired by the anti-terror laws that were post 9/11, and then we sort of very loosely based the piece on The Trial by Kafka, and told the story of someone. Yes, for those who didn't see the play. The story of a man who was unexpectedly arrested on terrorism charges, but without the right to appeal, without the right to know what he'd done, what he was accused of, without the right to any representation. So really, very, very dark stuff done as a musical.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to balance.
Well, that was the conversation that my friend, very dear friend and colleague Andrew Taylor, came to me and had. He'd sort of been working on this piece. He knew he had to write something about it because he was so angry about the change in the legislation. But he said that it was just such an emotive topic that every time he wrote, he just got dragged down into the darkness of the story, and that somehow music would allow the piece to reach a much greater audience and to resonate in a much more meaningful way. And so we created the piece, and thankfully it did. It was hugely successful on the Fringe.
It seems to breathe in a way, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah. And sometimes it allows you to go darker with the darkness and to find the humanity, and to, where it's that thing of, I think, using music to be able to look straight into a character's soul or straight into a character's mind. It's not always easy to do that without being, not impossible, but it's not always easy to do that without seeming clunky in conventional drama.
Sense, yeah.
And
I
guess
it's an
it's
established norm, isn't it?
It
really is.
I guess it's the thing also that we were able to do in Royal Vauxhall that the BBC's brilliant biopic on Kenny Everett recently was really interesting and really good. But what they weren't able to do was just open his chest and look at what was going on inside, and find that deep turmoil, and that we could do. So yes, Failed States was then a lovely springboard the following year to writing probably the opposite of that musical was, but I think we came close to finding it in Scott Mills the musical for BBC Radio 1. So that was a brilliant challenge that was set by Scott and his team. Kind of had this idea, as they often do. They wanted to do the Edinburgh Fringe. They wanted to do a musical, and they wanted to create it, cast it, write it, produce it in a week. And so we wrote Scott Mills the musical, and I remember when I first had a meeting with Emlyn Dodd, Scott's producer at the time, and he said, well, we want to either go for a 1-star show or a 5-star show.
That is the range available.
Myself and Patrick Wilde, who directed the piece, said, well, as creatives who do this for our living, we would probably rather go with the 5-star show.
There's more than just a little laugh here, isn't there? This is a reputation.
Indeed. And so, over the course of a week, we wrote, we cast, we directed, we produced the 5-star Scott Mills the musical, starring Scott Mills, starring David Hasselhoff, also importantly starring Kathy Clugston from Radio 4. More on that in a moment. And so we did it. We played here. We played sort of live on stage to sell out audiences. We went live on air to 6 million people, and so a very different writing experience, very different creative experience, but I think
profile building though, isn't it?
Profile building, and also really important in terms of my journey as a composer, and being able to do the kind of Sondheim-esque, Lynn Gardner's words, not mine, stuff that we did with Failed States, and then to totally reverse it and say, okay, right, so we need something now that will be listenable to the very young and groovy and trendy listeners of Radio 1.
And forged in fire, if I may say, over a week. I mean, that's also a good thing to know yourself, that, if in a hole, you can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because not every composer can say, not just compose in a week, they might not be able to make a song in a week.
No, but very often we kind of have to, don't we? When you see the deadline getting closer and closer and closer and closer.
Right, here I
go. We all know we're capable of writing a show in a week, because
people do.
Because we've had to do it. So with that occasion, that was really good, and also because Emlyn and Rob and Scott and the Radio 1 crew just know their audience so well, and they're such great producers, really incisive, really precise, and so you come to them with a song that was beautifully written, and you were totally happy with it, and they'd say, this is all over the course of a week, so there wasn't much time for songs to be rejected, but they would say, it's great, it's an amazing song, it's fantastic, we definitely can't use it in the show. Because that's just simple things like there's too many words in that song for the radio, which is not to denigrate the Radio 1 audience, but to say when their diet is pop songs that just have less words than the average Des O'Connor song, then Desmond O'Connor is in me, not the Permatan guy from Countdown. You need to just hone the craft and hone the writing. So really
and
important.
It is. I mean, musical theatre is now its own thing. It was once overlapped with pop. Pop and musical theatre were the same thing in the 30s. They are not now.
And in the 80s, interestingly.
Well, funnily enough, I agree with you, actually. Andrew Lloyd Webber did bizarrely. It seems hard to believe, but yes, he re-popped music.
Exactly, and it was the era of sort of chess and having musical theatre songs at number one in the charts. I can't remember the last time that happened. I know we've had, I think it would have been the kind of Elaine Page era, wouldn't it?
It would absolutely, yes. A song from Phantom or something like that.
So
I think you're right.
So there's something, something of that reference in Royal Vauxhall as well, I guess, with the How Drunk Do I Have to Be song. There's kind of, wants to pay a nod to that, the 80s pop ballad, but the 80s pop musical theatre ballad, a song that tells a story.
But there's a couple of other things pulling in a different direction, aren't there? You're trying to tell the story, and that must be the function of the songs, and the moment that's being portrayed through the song and the journey that it carries you through. But we've already said the 80s are the invisible partner in the room, and that has a stylistic feel of its own. And, if I may say, you've only gone and got Freddie Mercury there, and Freddie Mercury, if he's something, is a pop singer. He's a rock star, isn't he? I mean,
very much.
Did you feel that those were directions you were being pulled up? Were you pulled apart by those things, or did you actually find it was actually easy to synthesise those things in together to get your individual sound? Because it is an individual sound, but
I know exactly
what I'm trying to say.
There's a real there are lots of things pulling in different directions, and I think as a composer it's always I suppose the main thing is just to go with your heart in terms of the piece, and that's where the connection with the characters comes in. I think if you're writing about something that you're not passionate about, then it's a more difficult process. But because I knew the voice that I was trying to give to all three characters, and because their musical world, their musical palette was quite clear, because we know what Kenny liked to play. Yes. We know that Princess Diana's favourite song was The Lady in Red. Interesting. And we know, and of course we know of Freddie Mercury's oeuvre. So I think sort of getting those musical themes, those leitmotifs into the show was easier than it might have sounded, because they were so fundamental to the characters. So, you know, it's a case that, you know, when Diana sings, we know the kind of musical arrangement she has to have. We know the kind of melody.
It's almost stereotype, though, in a sense, isn't it? She would sing like that.
Exactly,
actually,
yeah. And I think
I never bought her album.
This was this was certainly a show where I tried not to be afraid of stereotype, because it was important to give people to some extent what they expected from the characters, because we were also going to give them things that they really didn't expect from the characters. So those...
Well, it's a shorthand for sketching a character in a way, isn't it? Particularly if they have this iconic status.
And of course, because of the way that music works in the memory, it's a really good thing to just give triggers, just the right little notes, pun intended, to to place the character in the audience's consciousness before you then take them on the journey into a part of that character that they hadn't expected to see, I guess.
No, I think that's absolutely fabulous, and I think you achieve it perfectly as well.
Thank you.
Can I ask, what's the sort of the duration, gestation period of this piece? You know, when you had the idea a few years ago, when did it first... When would you say a first version of it was?
So it was... I think it's all kind of happened over the course of a year and a bit. That I certainly know that the first final draft, as it were, happened at the Vauxhall Tavern in
you actually went to
May.
Went home,
yeah. So So this piece was first put on its feet in the Vauxhall Tavern, and we'll be back at the Vauxhall Tavern in the autumn. We've got a handful of dates there.
Fantastic.
So May was when it all sort of started to get put together, but sort of a few months earlier than that was when I was guest hosting the club, and I just decided I was going to write it as a kind of serial musical. So I was hosting there for 4 weeks running, and I got three very good friends, Claire Benjamin, Dr. Clive Selwyn, and Stuart Saint, were on board as my Diana, my Freddie, and my Kenny. And basically every week they were given the songs and the scripts about half an hour before they went on stage. So yeah, the cast of that first run at the Vauxhall Tavern were given their scenes and their songs about half an hour before they went on stage. Told,
You've taken this Scott Mills thing to heart.
Get your heads around that. Get on stage. Let's do it. It was very deliberately seat of the pants, because the idea was just to kind of sketch the music and sketch the scenes in front of an audience, see what landed, see what didn't, get a sense of the piece, and then go and, you know, then the hard work began, really, in terms of, you know, I had the essence of the piece, I had the essence of the characters, but really then we had to start to tell the story. So the first draft told the story. Three mates go to a pub, and the pub happens to be the RVT, and then I started to really delve into, okay, who were these people? Why did they have to go there? Why did it have to be the RVT? Why at this moment in time? And that was where the fun really began. And so then a short while afterwards we had draft number one, and then inevitably, sort of deadlines loom. We were booked by Tanya Harrison of Latitude Festival. Kind of heard the buzz around this previews that we did at the Vauxhall Tavern. So definitely want to book it for Latitude Festival. So kind of the first ever full performance of the final piece happened at Latitude Festival on a Sunday night. Headlining the cabaret tent, which was brilliant, but also it was a Sunday night, so we had a rave tent going on outside. So a beautiful cacophony, a lovely mix of
strangely
appropriately, it was the way that rave music sort of invaded all of our consciousness in the 1980s, and my God, it really did invade our consciousness that night.
And it's still youth culture, so it connects.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, to this day.
Yeah.
So which Latitude, this year or last?
That was this year.
Oh right, okay.
So it was a few weeks ago. So that was that was our baptism of fire. We saw what landed. We saw what needed tweaking. We grounded.
What did tweak, if you don't mind me asking, in general terms?
I think it's in terms of just the relationship of the characters on stage is the thing that's, you know, really taken work to get right, because they're so volatile, they're so vulnerable, they're so needy. And part of that need is to need each other, but
they're
part
quite
of their
giving in their neediness, oddly, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a silly thing to say, but you know what I mean by that.
Which, as we know of the biography of the characters, all three of them really were that.
Yes.
You know, they were. Is it fair to say that quite often people who need love and need attention and need care from others are very good at providing that for other people. We know that Kenny was extraordinarily giving and really generous to a fault, as people would say. You know, the kind of the prodigal son thing of, you know, giving away everything to others to be accepted and to be liked. Princess Diana's work for others was phenomenal when she was really and you know, really treated very, very badly by the people who loved her and the people who should have loved her and the people around her, and in the heart of that and in the face of that was utterly dedicated to doing things for people who had been totally ostracised by society. You know, I think we can't overestimate the importance of those moments when she went to London Lighthouse and held hands,
shook hands, absolutely,
with people with AIDS.
Yeah.
You know, in the era that mothers were abandoning their sons because they were HIV. So, you know, that's, you know, I wanted a sense of that, and I think we're still tweaking and still trying to find that, you know, that how you communicate without being clunky, the sense that Diana lost two very dear friends to AIDS, and then I'm sure lost many more of her dear friends to AIDS, and then went on to use her enormous influence to so that's, you know, it's kind of finding those relationships. And then Freddie Mercury, as we know, was kind of known as Mother Mercury by his so he had this phenomenal kind of presence on stage and a huge rock and roll lifestyle and appetite, but then in the midst of all that was really caring. And, you know, would have been, by all accounts, an amazing father, you know, really dedicated to young people around him.
You think of the strutter on stage.
Yes.
Strutter is the word, isn't it?
Yeah, you do.
Absolutely. And then you, behind the scenes, the empathy and the sympathy, funnily enough, yes.
But it's so easy to forget that the people who do that on stage are so often not like that off stage. It's, you know, it's got to be a character, because it would
not to be.
Well, it would be exhausting, wouldn't it, to live your life like that? I think people have tried, and I'm certain, you know, modern rockers, I think the Pete Dohertys of this world, you know, do the onstage thing, the onstage thing off stage, do the offstage thing on stage. It's like, well, hang on a minute, this, you know, this is entertainment.
And when does your reality blur as well?
Exactly.
So this is absolutely fascinating. So you learned from Latitude, but the show was in a very good state, wasn't it? And then is it the same cast at Latitude who have come to Edinburgh?
So that was our kind of, you know, that was our final three, really. So with Tom Giles as Freddie, and Matthew Jones as Kenny, and Sarah Louise Young as Princess Diana. So.
Now I want to talk about those performances, actually, because I think the three of them are absolutely cracking. I think they delineate their parts brilliantly, so you know who they're being. They do those parts, but there is a question, isn't there, when you're portraying someone who is has been a real person. And it's the question of how you portray them. Impression, impersonation, embodiment, as it were, or evocation. Now, I think you've very sensibly gone for evocation.
It was really important to do that because in the era of the jukebox musical and the revival musical, you know, all of which are great. There's some fantastic pieces of musical theatre that a lot of very dear friends are involved in. But in that world where we're trying to really accurately recreate famous figures from music from the past, this show wasn't trying to do that, and I didn't want the show to be pigeonholed in that way.
It's not a tribute show in that sense,
no,
is it?
No, and I think it would be...
It's a drama first, and we must remember that.
Be really easy to blur the boundaries, and for people to get confused then about what we're trying to do, because it's absolutely not a jukebox musical because it's original music, and it's not a tribute show because it's really going to a very different place. It's not a straight biography. It's
I think it's not a straight biography.
It's not a straight biography. Enough said.
I think that works on so many levels. I think you have hit perfection there.
So I had that conversation with Tom Giles brilliantly playing Freddie quite early on. Because obviously, you know, he's a tremendously gifted actor and a dedicated actor, and like all actors, kind of, you know, want to do the very best he can, and kind of talking about the essence of Freddie and how to capture, you know, certain mannerisms and vocal mannerisms and physical mannerisms. And, you know, we had this very conscious moment of saying, well, we had dozens of Freddie Mercury impersonators who auditioned for the piece. So if I wanted someone who looked exactly like Freddie Mercury and sounded exactly like Freddie Mercury, we could have had that, but I didn't want that. I wanted someone who could perfectly capture the vulnerability of a man who's just discovered that he's dying.
It's an acting role.
And that's, you know, that's what Tom could do that no one else could do, and that's why Tom is in the role and no one else. So, you know, it's that, you know, it's capturing the essence of Freddie and the essence of Freddie at a moment in time. That was what we were looking for.
You can see him breaking up inside, actually, even trying to hide stuff from his friends, and also that slightly self-destructive thing that he does later on.
Yes.
As they all do in their own way, or some of them. But yes, no, he's an accomplished. Well, they're all accomplished, actually. They're fantastic. But in terms of, as I say, this is why I use the word evocation, because you get who he is, but you also are able to go into the subtleties and the pain and the bits and pieces that you don't get from impersonators, and you don't need to do the voice. You know, forgive me, actually, he looks the part anyway.
Yes.
You know, with a 1980s tash.
Yep.
clever use of a singlet, and one nice, what I sort of semi-military kind of sort of yellow jackety top. Sort of, I don't know how you describe a commissionaire's jacket.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well,
it's
a perfect recreation of the Freddie Mercury Live Magic Tour jacket, which is it's not indiscreet to say, it was probably the most expensive item of costume, prop, or clothing that we had in the whole piece
because it's a specialist item.
Because it had to be, because I think rather than
Kenny can turn up in a t-shirt and trousers, whereas Freddie has to look.
Yeah, rather than it was important that we had something that just gave a very clear signpost to Freddie, so that Tom then had complete freedom to take us into different parts of Freddie's psyche. So we wanted, for those in the audience who would sort of finger point and say this didn't look quite right or that didn't look quite right, we needed a good clear signal to show, we've made that effort because what we want you to focus on is this. Yeah. So he's brilliant.
What he's saying, doing and giving us.
Yeah.
And the same with Kenny, because, forgive me, as I say, I've been channeling Kenny for many years, and it comes out of the strangest moments. I work in a very informal environment. I'm a civil servant,
right?
And every now and then he'll channel himself through me, and I'll go, ooh, or whatever it is. Kenny rode up, but that's easy. But that's an impression. It doesn't mean anything. That's just a trapping.
Yeah.
The important thing for the drama and for the actor is actually to go beyond the trapping, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can throw in a few mannerisms. They're not actually that hard. And so I love the fact that you got once again the essence of Kenny Everett without it being an impression by the actor who says
Matthew Jones. So Matthew Jones will be known to most people on the Fringe and way beyond as one half of Frisky and Manish, the brilliant musical comedy duo. So hugely accomplished in that field, and a brilliant cabaret performer and a brilliant composer, a phenomenal singer, but also, as I think tends to happen when you're sort of very well known for one thing that you do, sort of the myriad talents that he has sort of don't get promoted as much. And so I know over the last couple of years Matthew's been really keen to move more into the realm of acting and musical theatre acting.
Chops.
Yeah, exactly. Which are not unsubstantial. And so I kind of knew when I've sort of been really blessed with the part of Kenny Everett, because in London we were working with Stuart Saint, who is a phenomenal actor, really, really understood and captured and channeled that darkness of Kenny's personality combined with the manic lightness and energy, and you really, really discovered that. And Stuart sadly wasn't able to join us for the Edinburgh run. Matthew was, and I kind of knew that Matthew was probably the only other person that I knew who was going to be able to sort of plough the depths and really find the nuances and find the subtlety and find the fragility. But it's not, it's fragility combined with anger, combined with, so many things. It's a very, very demanding part. I think all of the parts go on such a massive journey over the course of
He's a rainbow character, but one of the colours in that rainbow is black.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you have Sarah Louise Young, who is also, if I may say, a cabaret queen.
Yes.
And has done it all.
I think maybe a goddess now. I think she's been, she's ascended.
Yeah. So Her Imperial Highness, Sarah Louise, and she plays Diana. And a quick cameo as Thatcher, if you want to, if you're doing your 80s icons. She's doing the tick box.
It's very good. Thatcher. Yeah.
But she's so, she's got the gentility, and I mean gentility in both of its kind of senses. There is the, because she wasn't actually born aristocratic, she was more gentry than aristocrat, per se, if we're looking at those hierarchical elements again. But also she has the gentility and gentleness that comes from being a gentle soul. Yeah. With a edge of iron in her when she needs to be, or steel. So I think the performances are wonderful, but it's interesting to me that I don't know, is Tom an actor or is he a cabaret artist and an actor?
Tom is an actor primarily.
Because you've got one actor and two people who are actor cabaret performers.
Yes.
And that ability to, when I say improvise, because it's a written piece, it's a narrative. I should lay my cards on the table. The day I came, the performance was brilliant.
Day,
there was a problem with a microphone.
Yeah.
But because they were such accomplished actors and they certainly appeared to be friends in real life.
Yeah.
It was as though their own brilliant working relationship. I hope they are friends, because if they're not, I'm being completely bamboozled. But it looked like their own personal skills and friendship then informed the characters that they were playing to deal with a slightly awkward situation which had occurred through no one's fault at all, just a bad luck thing. And then they improvised and joked and ad-libbed around it. There was a lovely moment, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but someone went off to have their microphone checked.
Yeah.
And Kenny, at first it was the actor playing Kenny, Matthew Jones, who goes off and he makes an improvisation. He's going up the steps to the bit at the back of the auditorium.
Yeah.
He goes, "Ooh, isn't my flat big?" And it was just wonderful. And they completely won over the audience there.
Yeah.
And in no way did that cause any trouble at all. In fact, it almost forged the audience and the performers together in a kind of, we're all in this together, to use a political phrase. Now, I would like to stress, absolutely, the show is a brilliant show, and that was just an unfortunate circumstance. And, in no way diminishes anything. But it was lovely because what it did, it just slightly pulled the curtain back a little bit to show us how wonderful your performers are in all eventualities.
It's the...
And that symbiosis and connection really informs the performances. Sorry, I suppose is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think it's a central thing to casting an Edinburgh show, and it's something that Lucy Ray, our director, did so brilliantly, is not only find three people who can, play the parts, play these extraordinarily demanding parts, and play them off the stage and do them phenomenally well, and have the singing skills, the acting skills, the movement skills. You've then also got to get a cast of people who will work together through thick and thin, and it's hard doing a month on the Fringe. It's really demanding, emotionally, physically, financially.
And they've got other things to do as well.
Exactly.
Sarah Louise is I don't know if she's sleeping this month.
Sure, we're going to come on to Sarah Lou in a moment, because she's, she really, I think, deserves special mention. But it's that thing of, a cast that can really gel and really hold each other and pull together and be there for each other. And bizarrely, it seems like a perverse thing for a writer and a producer to say, but when I saw the wheels come off technically on Sunday night, it just made me feel proud and so thrilled for that cast that they just held each other brilliantly, but also held the piece and did so, completely in character. And that's an extraordinary thing to demand of people. It's
but also you kept the audience as well. Forgive me, that's a great thing too, because as you say, they held it together with themselves and formed their own protective unit. Protective isn't the right word, because actually it was an embracing unit, almost, actually is a better way of putting it, I think. But the audience were included in that.
That's the thing.
We weren't left out. We were in there with them, and it was just goodwill emanating from all corners. Yeah. But I think we should just stress that was a one-off.
It was a one-off,
yes,
thankfully. Thankfully, of many hours and a few pounds have been spent to make sure that it never happens again.
But the point is that it shows how marvellously cohesive the whole thing is, infrastructurally, let alone a cleverly written piece and beautifully sung and well written. It's actually every aspect of it is working towards a central core.
Great. I suppose the piece itself is about what happens when the unthinkable happens to desperate people in a desperate situation. And so, what better way to test that than to have every single microphone go wrong over the course of 3 minutes on stage.
And Sarah Louise really.
Well, Sarah Louise, as we've said, an extraordinary performer, a great creative talent, a phenomenal improviser, as we know, sort of comes from the Showstopper stable, which...
And she's done Fascinating Aida.
Fascinating
and
Aida.
She's a cabaret star in her own
Exactly.
Right, and a double act and a single performance.
Very little she can't do.
She could drive a bus and entertain people, that woman.
She probably does. She's probably doing that during the night
yes.
doing Edinburgh bus tours. So I've been working with Sarah Lou for years, I think for over 10 years now, and throughout that time I think we have a great trust as friends. I have her to thank for my wife-to-be and my two children. It was when I was visiting Sarah Louise for dinner that her flatmate happened to be in, and the rest is divine history.
Your next musical.
Yeah, it could be. So, a very dear friend and a very trusted colleague and a phenomenally talented person, and I think just working, sort of creating this part of Princess Di with and for her has been such an exciting thing and so nourishing for me creatively, and just when you have the joy of writing a song for someone that will sing it so well, and when you have the joy of writing scenes for someone who can then come back to you, and because they're such an intelligent actor and a feeling actor, can then the questions that she asked of my writing and the suggestions she gave were really fabulously incisive, and I think have made that part of Diana so strong.
She's a thinking, feeling actress.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and it's, I think in this business, in this fiercely competitive business, it's so easy for you sort of feel you're struggling and just desperate for the recognition. Sarah Louise is getting the recognition she deserves, but I think she'll never fully get the recognition she deserves because it's impossible to give it to her. It's she's a great talent, and it's I'm just really glad that people are seeing that and that people are seeing her work, and I just hope that in the next few years her reputation and her name will
go
explode.
Higher,
to the degree they
Which
deserve.
I believe is a Freddie Mercury song, isn't it? Let's get back to some of those beautiful subtleties, and I'd love to know how many of these are organic and have developed, or you put them in the script, or they've just come out over time, or are accidental. These things do happen. I'm going to pick one.
Yep.
Kenny has a moment where he reverts to his Morris Cole youth,
right,
and meets a priest in confession.
Yes.
In a flashback sequence of some variety, and the priest does some surprising things.
Yeah.
Nice, once again, rug pulling from the author. I don't know if he's here yet. But there's a lovely moment where at the end of their interview, as it were, the priest walks off wagging his fingers in the what I would call the brotherly love. And was that something you said? I'm going to put that in just because I love that.
Do you know that wasn't a stage direction? That's my brilliant cast doing their brilliant best. So yeah.
Because I sat there and I immediately giggled because I thought I know what they're doing. It's fantastic, and it's full of those beautiful little moments. So it's beautifully crafted, but it's obviously also it's had a couple of glacé cherries stuck on it as well, then, isn't it? As well, here and there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's the hard work of our director Lucy and the cast, and it's just so fabulous to put work into the hands of people who will then take it and run with it, and are then coming back to me with all the Mother Mercury stuff was all stuff that Tom Giles had told me, because he's just done so much research. You feel you've done exhaustive research and watched every YouTube clip, and then suddenly the cast come back and say, so have you seen this? And did you know that Di said this or that Kenny said this? And it's really exciting to and it's the joy of creating new work, isn't it?
It's a tapestry, really.
Yeah, and you're sort of drip feeding all the time these little moments, these little phrases, these little subtleties of sort of movement and speech, and I think a lot of the subtleties have been discovered as we've gone along, which is great.
Take us back to the score just briefly then. This is a crass question, but actually sometimes reveals things. What's your favourite song? Now, when I mean favourite, I mean, is there a song that particularly speaks to you, or a song that just makes you beam with delight because it's so good or funny or meaningful or sad? Or is there something that is actually autobiographical in some sense? It can be any answer.
Although
please show you're working.
The song that makes me feel really proud in the show is, are we allowed to swear?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Don't Fuck With Diana, which is Diana's great coming out. So I kind of, just without spoiling too much about the show, to escape from the world in which they're in, all three characters have to come out. So Kenny has to come out of the closet, Freddie has to come out about being ill, and Diana has to come out of an abusive relationship, an abusive marriage, and so that's her coming out song, Don't Fuck With Diana. She suddenly realises, it's the kind of awakening moment. She turns from being this shy, retiring kindergarten teacher who's afraid of the press and afraid of the world, indeed, and just suddenly discovers, hang on a minute, I could be the most powerful woman in the world. Yeah. The press love me, and the press are all powerful.
Not wishing to be coarse, it's the moment she discovers she's got balls of steel.
Yeah, yeah, precisely. So, yes. So I'm really proud of that song and the way it works and the way Sarah Louise sings it. It's such a climactic moment of the show. It really works for me. And
it comes at a great moment anyway. Absolutely.
Exactly.
It's actually, although that's her moment, we've had lots. All the characters have fed into that in some way.
Yeah.
And there are wounds being licked, aren't there?
Yeah. So yes, I mean, it begins as a show where she's afraid that she's going to lose the man she loves, and ends with her saying, "Okay, I'm going to lose the man I love."
Yeah.
And this is how it's going to happen, and this is what I'm going to walk away with. So I'm really proud of that song and the way that it works and the way that it kind of does. It's the kind of holy grail of a musical theatre song that you kind of build emotionally to a point, and then you arrive at a point that the only other thing you can do is sing, and that's, I think it ticks that box. And then the song that makes me cry almost every night is How Drunk Do I Have to Be, which is all three characters singing about the fact that they just cannot be themselves, and the way that,
real sense,
and trying to, the image that they're being forced to project by society or by their role, by their fame, is destroying them simultaneously. And so, and I think like any song that you write, there's always biographical elements, autobiographical elements, and I think that really resonates for me. Again, coming from a background in teaching, which is largely to do with presenting a semi-artificial sort of state, because you're presenting yourself as someone and an imparter of knowledge and guiding young and impressionable souls, and an authority figure. So it doesn't feel like it, but I personally think that most teachers are in role, and that's why one of the reasons teaching is so exhausting. I was simultaneously working full time as a cabaret performer in a very different realm, and so this is where again a lot of the being in disguise to be who you are comes from. It's a theme I've explored previously in my first solo show I did in the Fringe, Desmorphia, which was just about the kind of how we set ourselves up in different with different identities.
It's when worlds collide, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. Well, exactly. Yeah, I seem to remember a Monday morning arriving back. I'd kind of done a gig on a Sunday night in Amsterdam, very late at night. I managed to get a bus straight to the airport, hop onto the plane, got into school on time to teach on a Monday morning. No mean feat. Started teaching a Latin lesson, and one of the children in the front row put his hand up and said, "Mr. O'Connor, are you wearing makeup?" It's like, oh God.
Which you don't want to hear at school, do you?
A little bit of glitter and eyeliner still had survived. So I think that's where the masks and the image and the identity thing came from. So there's certainly...
That's so appropriate for the show, because that's...
So there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that in this show.
Because we forget that armour is restrictive.
Yeah, I think it can. Yes, much as it can open doors and open opportunities, it can create difficulties. It can catch up with you. It can have a sting in its tail, come back and bite you.
So I think Royal Vauxhall is a supremely excellent show. It's a 5-star show without a doubt. I would like everybody to see it because it's such a good show at every level. You know, you go away smiling, but also you know that the subtlety is. It's a show you take home with you. It's one of those shows, and they're the best shows because you enjoy them when you're in. But it's not like it's not like a bag of crisps. It stays with you afterwards. And that's meant positively.
I'm going to put that on my flyer. It's not like a bag of crisps. No, many others.
But you know, a show that you wake up the next day and you're still thinking about?
Well, it's the thing, isn't it? Because we looked at lots of different time slots for the show. You know, it could have been a mid-afternoon show. We could have done it mid-afternoon and sold out from day one just because of the characters that are in it. You know, knowing our onions, we've got the brilliant Susanna Rosenthal producing, and she really knows her stuff in terms of selling out a show. She's producing Showstopper down the road at Pleasance Grand, selling out every single day. You know,
they stacked the West End recently, didn't they?
The biggest venue in Edinburgh, selling out every single day. So certainly with the subject matter and the name and the characters involved, we could have done that. But it was very important for us to make the choice to put it on at a time of night where it would really hit the audience that we wanted it to hit, and where, exactly as you say, it would be the last thing people saw on a day. It would give them the right dose of comedy, because that's what people want and expect in Edinburgh. It would give them a sort of song in their hearts as they stepped out into the night, which is always, one's aim as a writer and a performer and a composer. But also give them something to talk about, and kind of, be sitting up at 3 a.m, talking about Kenny Everett and how they'd underestimated how important he was, and they must dig out those old videos of the Kenny Everett television show. So.
What about you, Desmond? How do people follow you?
Oh, well, DesmondO'Connor.com, which in the midst of getting myself ready for the Fringe, there's so many things to bring a show to the Fringe, and the one thing I'd sort of been saying for months is, God, I've got to get my website sorted out because I hope the show's going to be a wild success, and I hope that everyone's going to be Googling me. And my website, which my lovely wife-to-be, Zoe Kennedy, had already built for me several years previously, just needed a little bit of refreshing and updating, and she, without even asking, very, very beautifully sort of redid the whole thing. So DesmondO'Connor.com. I definitely should, yeah, she's definitely a keeper. So the newly revised and updated DesmondO'Connor.com is where you can find out about the madness that is my creative world.
And people can, if they're interested perhaps in pursuing the show, either seeing where it goes, or if investors do occasionally find websites, so
Indeed.
People can contact you there.
It'll all be on there, and they can find me and they can contact me. They can also look me up on Facebook and Twitter and all those things. World of Des, I think, on Twitter. But I still this is the one year I'm sort of finally beginning slowly to get my head around Twitter. But yeah, I'm definitely a Facebook man. 140 characters, as you've probably gathered from this hour of interview. I don't do a lot of things in 140 characters or less. I'm a little more sesquipedalian than that.
Oh, what a wonderful
I don't think you could even get that into a tweet, could you?
You probably couldn't. No, I was going to say the interview would boil down on Twitter. This interview down to show is good, thank you. Yeah. But this is all wonderful, and I'm so delighted. But to finish this conversation, if I may, you've written a gem of a show, and it does everything I want the show to do. It's funny, it's meaningful, it's subtle, it's clever. It's just everything about it is top notch. What will you take from the Edinburgh iteration of this show for you? You, Desmond, what are you going to carry away with you? And don't say the scenery.
It's always...
I like that chair, it looks nice.
It's always really interesting when you've written a show and you think the show that you've written, and then you put it in front of an audience and you start discovering a whole different world of meaning, because it ceases to be the thoughts in your head and the story you want to tell, and it starts to resonate with others, and people come up to you laughing afterwards or crying afterwards, and they share memories of the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, or they share their memories of coming out or not coming out, or leaving a husband, or discovering they were ill. And
big
so
life moments, really.
I think the thing that I'll take from Edinburgh is the things that I discovered about the piece and tweaked and nudged along the way, so that it just tells that story more efficiently and really resonates and hits home with an ever wider audience, we hope. And B, I think just a sense of pride in my work, because it's very, as you have highlighted, I'm very busy, and I keep myself very busy, and that's part of my psyche for better or for worse. Very rarely do I have a chance to sit down and appraise my work, and in Edinburgh I've done it night after night. I'm also working every weekend in the Cabaret Club in Glasgow, every Wednesday at the Cabaret Club in Glasgow, but every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday I'm sitting down and watching a show that I've created, and allowing myself to feel a little bit of pride in what I've done, and I don't do that very often, and that's been a really nice thing from Edinburgh. And I really, being able to say, we had this conversation before we started the interview, didn't we? Being able to say, I feel proud of what I've done. I think I've created something good, and that makes me happy.
Well, can I just say, just to tie this up in what may seem a cheesy way, but the show is so much about pride in all of its meanings, gay, straight, otherwise, and pride in who you are. But yes, you should be absolutely proud of this show. This show is a marvellous show. So Desmond, thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you.
I look forward to following your future work as well.
Brilliant,
and
yeah.
hopefully talking on the record.
Thank you.
Musical Talk. And there you have it. That was Desmond O'Connor, and I was very grateful to him for giving me time to talk to him, because he was just about to fly out of Edinburgh in order to make arrangements for his forthcoming wedding. If you want something done, ask a busy man. And the show was fantastic, and I'm pleased to say it was revived several times at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern itself in London last autumn. And who knows, we may see it again. It was, as I said, a 5-star show, the Musical Talk Pick of the Fringe 2016. But our coverage doesn't finish with this conversation, because next week I hope you'll listen again and hear a conversation with Tom Giles and Sarah Louise Young, who played Freddie Mercury and Diana, Princess of Wales, in that Edinburgh production. And the conversations are not only fascinating, the people are wonderful, and I think you'll agree in one of the cases, the context of the interview itself is curious in the extreme. I'll say no more, but do tune in again next week. But, of course, as wise people say, but also me, if you're going to come back to Musical Talk, you've got to leave it. And I'm going to encourage you to do that now by me saying goodbye. Goodbye. See, I'm true to my word. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2017. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at MusicalTalkThos.
Musical talk, yes. So here on the balcony of the Abattoir Bar in Edinburgh, a little bit of wind.
Yes,
going to
what
try
I'm going to
and
do.
rectify. We could move over there, actually, couldn't we? That'll be
It's raining, and we'd have to put the brolly up. That's
Yeah.
no problem doing that, is there? Should we do that?
Yeah, if it's better back.
Thank you.